It probably goes without saying that in this video, I'll show you how to fix this. Kids are great, eh? So I'll start with people watching this in an emergency situation. If you have water pouring out of your radiator right now, try to catch it. It will stop eventually because it is a closed system. It's not connected to the mains. If you need to grab something, I find a bacon tray to be quite helpful because it can fit underneath the low valves of the radiator. Another thing to be aware of before you get started, if your radiator is connected to a combi boiler, it means that as soon as you drain the water out of the system, it will stop the hot water in your house. If you do feel brave enough to have a go though, then watch along and I'll go through my process of fixing this. So the very first thing to do is to switch the boiler off to make sure it doesn't come on whilst working on the system. So before we get started, we need to drain out the water out of this radiator. Now, if you can isolate the rest of the house, that saves you a lot of water draining. So in my case, I'm going to turn off the valve either side and undo the nuts on the radiator side, which should just drain the water out of this radiator, keeping the rest of the water in the house system. So to probably empty the radiator of water, you need to undo this little bleed valve at the top. This lets air in to replace where the water was. So a couple of things I forgot to mention to the camera here was, number one, make sure the heating has been off for a while so you're not emptying scalding hot water for obvious reasons. And the other one is because the radiator wall brackets in this situation have been ripped off, the only thing holding it up is the pipework. So if you're disconnecting the pipework, the radiator is going to want to drop. So it's a good idea to think about how you're going to handle that. Unfortunately, I didn't think about that in this one, so you can see just about that I put a chair up against the radiator and I manhandled it. But in hindsight, having a second person there to hold the radiator whilst I was disconnecting would have made this a lot easier. Now that this is off, I can see exactly what's happened. Doesn't look like this was sized right for the hole, or maybe the hole was just drilled too big in the first place. You can see here that I can just push this in and out. And that's no good. So I want to keep the same holes because all the pipework aligns with the radiator in that position. So I think the best thing to do is to find a bigger wall plug and see if we can make that a nice tight connection with one of those. So this screw also has a bit here with no threads, but if I check it in the wall plug, I can see that it doesn't actually start biting until about halfway down. So that should be about the same sort of distance, so I'm not going to lose any grip with that. I think it needs to be perfect. Ah, sugar. I had to open these holes up just a little bit more because the wall plug was hitting. Oh yeah. If you're finding this video useful, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified when my next video is out. Solid. So this step isn't necessary at all for the job, but I had some spare radiator backing for lying around and I thought I may as well make the most of it. This is meant to stop the heat from the radiator going into the wall and reflecting it back into the room. I don't know how well it works, but as the radiator was off and I had it spare, I thought why not? I just used some spray contact adhesive to stick that to the wall. Something else you might consider, depending on the size of your radiator, is that they're heavy. They're made of metal, and because they're heavy, they're awkward to move around. So again, having a second person here to help you makes this much, much easier. In my case, I didn't have a spare pair of hands around, so to get a better grip on the radiator, I removed these covers. These just unclip, and that way I can get a good grip on the ends to lift it up with. Lifting onto the brackets can be quite awkward because your pipes are in the way. Some pipes will have more flexibility on them than others. Mine didn't have that much, so I had to very carefully hang the radiator and then manipulate the pipes into place so that the radiator dropped into the right position. Yes! Once the radiator's in position and lined up, it's just a case of doing these nuts back up. Once you're connected, you can undo these valves now to let the water back in, and you should hear the air start rushing out of this bleed valve at the top. You know the radiator is full when water comes out, but that's unlikely to happen with the pressure already in the system. For that, we need to head back to the boiler and start filling it back up. So you don't have to do this step, but I'm going to add a bottle of inhibitor into the system. You can't put too much in from what I hear, so better safe than sorry. And in my case, I'm adding it in through this MagnaClean reservoir. I have to isolate the valves, take the top off, drain the water out, and that'll give me enough space to add the inhibitor in. Now it's time to fill the system back up to pressure, and it really does help if you have a second person helping you at the radiator that you've just been working on, and that's to keep an eye on the bleed valve and to turn it off when water starts coming through. And at that point you need to look at the gauge on your boiler. So if it's switched off, you can switch it on at this point. There should be a high and a low mark, and you should be aiming to get the pressure just in the middle. I can switch it off and run the heating just to make sure that everything's working okay. Once your system's up to pressure, it's a good idea just to check that you don't have any leaks. Another little tip that I've learned along the way is that if you tie a bit of tissue paper around any joints that you've been working on, it acts as a good indicator to see if you have any slow drips or leaks which need tightening up. So there we have it, job done. So this was how I would fix this as a DIYer. I'm not a professional plumber, so if you are and you spotted anything that I could have done better, please let me know down in the comments. I'll also leave links to anything I've used in the comments. With all that said, I'd like to thank my children for making this video possible. I couldn't have repaired a radiator hanging off the wall if it wasn't for them. So thank you for joining me on this one. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not, and I'll see you in the next one. I was actually a little bit worried I was going to pull it off the wall when I did that.